Professor Cullen, thank you for doing this interview with us. Professor Paul Cullen was born in Dublin in 1960 and is an internist, laboratory medicine specialist, and molecular biologist. Cullen has written over 250 scientific articles and several books and regularly publishes on issues of biomedical ethics. He is also chairman of the Doctors for Life Association, which works to protect life from the moment of conception to natural death. During the corona crisis, he was an outspoken critic of mandatory vaccination.
Yeah.
He also has an interest in transhumanism, so our interview will be about that.
Mm-hmm.
So first question, Professor Cullen, when we speak of transhumanism, we usually mean a specific ideology or philosophy. Can you tell us about this ideology or philosophy that lies behind transhumanism and about its most notable proponents?
Okay. Well, transhumanism is you could describe it perhaps as a movement that has existed for perhaps 40 years. And the idea is to use technology to overcome the limits of human existence. So to overcome the limits of human existence in two dimensions. So the first dimension is to improve the capacity, physical and mental capacity of humans. So to improve health, to improve longevity, to improve stamina, perhaps to improve intelligence, things like that. That's the first element. And the second part is to overcome the limits of human existence in terms of mortality. So there are short, medium, and long-term goals, and the ultimate long-term goal is to produce a fusion of the human being with machines. So to produce a sort to in fact almost upload human consciousness into a machine context, and in that sense to perhaps even achieve some form of immortality. So the conscious element of the human is transported from the biological sphere to the computer sphere, the machine sphere. This sounds, of course, like a completely unrealistic idea, but it is something that is actually being pursued with a certain degree of energy by a large number of prominent scientists and prominent people who are involved in the tech community worldwide. Yeah.
So this sounds also very kind of religious. Can we still call transhumanism a science?
I think that the transhumanism, if you for example the latest the book, one of the most important proponents or important members of the transhumanist community is Ray Kurzweil, who and he has published a number of books on this, and his books have titles like Achieving Transcendence, The Singularity is Near, and even if you take somebody who's not a transhumanist per se, but it is a certain way related to it, Yuval Noah Harari, his latest book is called Homo Deus, God Man. So I think certainly we would have to say that it's something that is not completely enclosed by scientific arguments, but it does have a conscious metaphysical dimension. Now it's a metaphysical dimension that is completely contained in the materialist sphere. So that's the difference to a transcendent religion. So all of the features are contained in this world. Okay, but in terms of the thought processes and the idea of transcendence, immortality, dissolution of the individual. These are all ideas that are not really scientific, empirical ideas that come from empirical research, but more in terms of their thought processes in the religious sphere.
Is there a link between transhumanism and the reductionistic view of evolutionism or Darwinism?
Well, I think all of these theories, and for example, the theory of evolution is still called the theory of evolution. Um, they start from a particular view of mankind, as a completely materialist being in a material world. Now, there may be aspects to the material world that we don't yet know, that we're not yet aware of. So, for example, before Robert Maxwell discovered radio waves. Now, there were radio waves before Robert Maxwell discovered them, but we weren't aware of them. So the electromagnetic spectrum. So people who propose that, they don't say we have completely described the world. So they would say there are elements of the world we don't know about. So one thing is dark matter in the universe. So what is that? How much is? So but they would say, but this material dimension, this material, that's all there is. And so one idea, for example, the idea of consciousness, they say consciousness is an emergent property. So consciousness emerges from electrophysiological brain activity. So it's an emergent, it's not a separate entity, it's something that emerges from an electrophysiological brain identity. And in the same way, the hard Darwinistic view is the idea, of course, that this is a for example, Richard Dawkins said, God is not, so Descartes, God is a watchmaker, okay? René Descartes. And Richard Dawkins says, God is not a watchmaker, he's a drudge. So this is this grinding process where, over long periods of time, selective advantage occurs, and but there are a number of problems that have not been solved in evolution. For example, one problem is, how did life begin? There's no convincing answer to the question, how did animate material arise from inanimate material? A second problem that hasn't been properly solved, to my mind, is the question of how one species develops into another species. So we have very good examples for development within the boundaries of a species. So, for example, Darwin, the finches on the Galapagos Island, okay, off the coast of Venezuela. This was classic, the different beaks, right? That Darwin, when he was on the Beagle on the boat, he saw these finches, and depending on the type of food the birds had, they had different shaped beaks, okay? So we can see evolution operating within species boundaries, but how one species then becomes a different species which cannot cannot mate with the original, we don't know how that happens. Mm-hmm. So there are a number of unsolved problems. The third unsolved problem is it's called the mousetrap problem. So the mousetrap problem is, a mousetrap will only work when all the components are there. If you take out just one component, one tiny piece of the mousetrap, it won't work. So, so it has to appear complete finished. What are the evolutionary steps towards the working mousetrap? Now I know this is something that the Darwinians would say, oh no, we have intermediate stages and so on, but that has not been completely. One example people give is the eye. Another example is the rotor of a cell. A little cellular motor. How does that work? It can only work when all components are present. Now I don't know what the answer is to that. But I'm just saying that there within this field of Darwinism, there are a number of unsolved problems. But we instead of dealing with these problems, we just go over them. And the same in transhumanism. So the mind-brain problem is a serious problem that has not been solved. So the proper thing to do would be to solve that and then go to the next step. But it's assumed, things are assumed, and then we go to the next step without solving the original problem.
So you mentioned the phenomenon of emergence, and it seems that often these people use this word, kind of like a magic word, when they can't explain when something happens. Could you speak a little more to that phenomenon of emergence, or the problem of emergence?
Well, the problem of emergence arises when you have a complex phenomenon that you don't understand. For example, like consciousness. So then you just say, well, it just arises by emergence. Emergence is it's a circular argument. So if consciousness is a pure product of the electrophysiological activity of neurons, well then we're just saying, well, the electrophysiological activity of neurons is consciousness, but we're not actually answering the question. We're just going around in a kind of a circle, because consciousness in this area does not have an independent existence. So what you need to have two different, what I call referents. So you need two different things existing in the world. So thing one is electrophysiological activity. Thing two is consciousness. But what's actually happening is we're redefining the first thing and we're saying, oh, it's emergent, so it's something else. But we're not actually moving beyond that area. We're just using a different word to describe it.
So coming back to transhumanism, we also often associate transhumanism with what goes on in Silicon Valley, the technological efforts to reach the next level of evolution, so to speak. You mentioned Ray Kurzweil. Where do you think this disordered urge to alter man's fundamental nature comes from?
I think that a lot of people who have a let's say a radical materialistic view, that is of course limiting, because it's limited in the two dimensions we spoke about earlier. So it's limited in terms of what I can do. So for example, everybody has limitations. I'm not a particularly good at sports. I could train, I'm a bit older now, but when I was younger, I could train 12 hours a day. I still wouldn't be able to play football properly. Okay, there's lots of things I can do, I can't do. Okay, and that's true for everybody. Okay, so we have that limitation, and the second thing is the other thing is of course a notion that there's such a thing as good people and better. You could be a better human. I think you can be better being your better self, but I don't think that the solution to being better is not to try and be somebody else or something else, right? Mm-hmm. But this idea is far. The second thing is to overcome this idea. Humans are, as far as we know, are the only animal that is aware of its own mortality. Well, certainly in the sense that we're aware of it. And of course, this is another great limitation. So faced with this dilemma, well, then we have to escape from that. And transhumanism seems to provide an escape hatch. Now, and if you're somebody who's just madly wealthy, so for a normal person, most people, the amount of money most people can imagine that they know how much it is. It's about twice what they earn in a year, right? There are studies on this. So let's say you have a fortune of $200 billion. That is so much money. It is just so. And if you have all that and still you're going to die when you're 85, right? And still you can't play tennis, and you're getting older, and you're not as, attractive as you used to be. Well, this of course is frustrating because you are so rich. And I think these are the elements that are fueling this.
You mentioned death and limitation. Mm. It seems that the struggle with this, the fact that we are mortal beings, that we die, is a struggle that accompanied us for a long time. And transhumanism is maybe just another expression of this struggle. Now, maybe from a Christian or Catholic point of view, what is the Christian answer to human mortality?
Well, of course, the Christian answer to human mortality is that this is only a short part of our existence, that we're limitless, eternal beings, that we're in the world to fulfill a certain function, and that the essential aspects of our existence are not accessible to us. So it's a question of humility in terms of what we can achieve. Humility is not an emotion that's common among transhumanists. I don't know if humility is an emotion, but it's certainly not an aspect that transhumanists are very strong in. But I think the idea of accepting one's limitations and trying within, we don't know nobody knows what it would be if they had been somebody else. But I think the healthier, even apart from a Christian perspective, the healthier way to go through life is to try and accept who you are and make the best of it and be the best person within those limits. But if we think this is it, and then that's the end of it, and we die, and that's it. Well, of course, this can be frustrating. Yeah.
You mentioned in your talk that there are two aspects within transhumanism: the fusion of human with animal and the fusion of human with machine. Can we say that there are maybe two sides of the same coin, and how are they different? How are they the same? Is maybe one worse than the other?
Well, the idea of what the first thing you mentioned, this is the generation of what are called chimeras. So this is where human embryos or human embryonic stem cells are being introduced into animal embryos to produce essentially a mixed creature, which is partly human, partly animal, or different animals. This is not, transhumanism. This is not part of the transhumanist movement. I see it as part of the same, but the transhumanists they see it as their field of expertise is technology, not biology. Okay, so they see the solution in the biological, I beg your pardon, in the technological direction. What you're talking about is the biological fusion between humans and non-humans, and I would say that this is the opposite direction. So this is the idea that if we as humans if we are nothing special, we are limited, we are mortal, we are animals, part of the nature, like a tree is part of nature. We're nothing special. Well, if we are nothing special, well then we can of course use that and for example interact with the animal kingdom in a purely utilitaristic fashion. So it's a utilitarist view of animals as well, actually. And the interesting part of this is that a lot of the criticism for this kind of experiment doesn't come from human rights activists. It comes from animal rights activists who say that it's an abuse of for example, pigs, if they are used in experiments where there have been experiments done where human stem cells have been introduced into pig embryos. And animal rights activists have said this is an abuse of the rights of the pig. And there was a big BBC program on the BBC about a few years ago about this. So that's an interesting thought. So the idea is not only are we nothing special, the animals are actually better than us. Mm-hmm. So this is the opposite direction. So if we can't go up, we have to go down. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Another question I would have, which is maybe kind of out of the box. Do you think that transhumanism obviously is a danger that maybe has its roots long before our time? Do you think that the Jewish anti-mixing laws have something to do with this?
That's above my pay grade. I can't answer that. Right. But I mean, what I can say is, like a lot of these things, there are certain aspects of course, use of technology that are good, and I don't want to give the wrong impression here. So, for example, one area is that electronic chips are being developed that are placed on the retina. So a common problem among older people is called macular degeneration. So the most important part of the retina when people get older degenerates and they become blind. And you can there are experiments, you can put a chip in and at least the person can distinguish between light and dark and maybe outlines, which enables a person to be able who is dependent to have a good degree of independence. Or another area is, for example, cochlear implants, where an implant in the brain allows deaf people to hear, or augmented limbs, for example. So as an artificial hand, perhaps, which is controlled by the nerves in the arm. So all of these things, I have no problem with that, because they don't fundamentally put into question the nature of the person. And I would see the difficulties arise, first of all, where we start to question the nature and the worth of the person. Okay, so where we start to impinge on human dignity. And the second area where I would see problems is if there's an element of coercion. The coercion has no place in medicine, as far as I'm concerned. And certainly here it doesn't have a place.
Looking at what happened all over the world in the last 2 years and how the COVID crisis was dealt with globally, how is this related to transhumanism? And what is the significance of this new medical treatment, which is a technological effort to circumvent the human body's natural reaction to sickness and the body's healing processes?
Okay, I think there are two issues. Without getting into it in great detail, there are two issues that I have with the COVID crisis and how it was dealt with, which relate indirectly to transhumanism. The first one is, I think we have to admit there has been massive abuse of science. So science, the fundamental element of science is doubt. But science has been presented to the public as an element of certainty. But science is not about certainty. Science is not about answers fundamentally, it's about questions. And so science, follow the science. But that I think is the first issue. So we had a fundamental misuse of science. And the second element, which I spoke about, is the element of coercion. So I think particularly when we come to the vaccination issue, my primary issue with vaccination is mandatory vaccination. So if somebody wants to get vaccinated, it's a personal decision. They have to decide. There are issues related to informed consent and the degree of how informed can the person be. But fundamentally, if somebody wants to get vaccinated, that's fine. But I don't think there is any place for mandatory vaccination, particularly in view of the fact that these are new therapies that have been only they don't have a proper authorization. They have conditional use authorization in the EU. They were only tested for a short period of time. There were problems with the testing. So I think in that context, mandatory vaccination, this element of coercion, I have problems with that.
How would you judge the criteria that the corona measures are based on?
Okay, well, I think that's an interesting question, because if you look at what happened, first of all, we had the incidence value, so the number of new cases. And then we had the R value. And then we had the hospitalization rate. And then we had the number of beds that were occupied in the intensive care unit. And then we went back to the incidence. And then I think what we published some work last, I think it was about a year ago now. The time moves so quickly, on the PCR test, where we showed, for example, that of the people with a positive PCR test, more than half, perhaps maybe 60%, had what's called a CT value, which was so high that indicates that the amount of virus they were carrying was so low that this person was not contributing to the, let's call it, pandemic activity. And I've already spoken about this. Measuring, for example, using a PCR test, which is hypersensitive in asymptomatic individuals, is a problem. We know that in Germany, for example, in 2020, only 4% of intensive care beds were occupied by corona patients. And of those corona patients, not everybody was in the intensive care unit because of corona, right? And only 3% of hospital beds were occupied by corona patients. Now, there were one or two hospitals that might have had a problem, but fundamentally this was never a problem, right? We know from research done at the University of Essen that there was no significant excess mortality in 2020. We know from research that was published very recently from the Johns Hopkins University, which was at the very core of the corona measures, that the corona measures had no mask, social distancing and so on, had at best a very, very small effect and that this effect is there is no relationship between the size of this effect and the enormous social and economic costs. And the problem I have is that not so much we were concentrating purely on the virus, and as if all the measures had no cost. But that's not how we can run our society. It's not how you can do medicine. So you always have to benefit. You have to measure risk and usefulness and at cost and use. So overall, the benefit of the therapy has to be greater than the costs overall, not in just one aspect. So in that respect, I think we had a very myopic, a very short-sighted view, focusing on one element, which then changed the whole time. And we didn't. So the effect on young children, for example, the effect on older people who are isolated for months at a time, the effect on small businesses, the effects on the economy. We can't even begin to measure how big these effects were. 100 million people of the poorest people in the world were catapulted by the COVID measures into absolute poverty, which is less than $1.90 a day. 100 million people. So I think that's the problem.
Thank you very much, Professor Cullen, for doing this interview with us.
You're welcome.
Thank you.